Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Me,
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. That's excellent.
that's much better. Yeah,
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gideon, and for joining me today for Palestinian Perspective. So, you've done so much as a journalist and as an activist. Perhaps before we get started in earnest, you can provide us with a self intro.
sure, sure. My name is Gideon Levy, as you know, and I live in Israel. I lived all my life in Israel. I never left Israel. I never had a soul to leave Israel. And in the last 32 years or so, I'm covering the Israel occupation, mainly the crimes of the Israeli occupation in the daily newspaper Haaretz, which is the oldest Hebrew newspaper in Israel. And I do so through weekly travels to the occupied territories and through opinion pieces, which I publish at least 3 times a week, and a column which is called the Twilight Zone, which covers all kinds of stories from the occupation. And I'm very proud to do so.
Yes. So you mentioned just now that it's been 30 something years that you've been doing this. Do you remember how you first came to decide to cover Palestine on the ground and how that changed you?
It was quite incidental, I would say. A friend, a member of the Israeli parliament, called me up one day and offered me to come with him to Nablus to see an old lady whose olive trees were uprooted by settlers. I went there and I made a story out of it. And a few weeks later, there was another small story, and I went again. And it took me some months until I realized that not only this is the biggest drama of Israel, that this is what defines Israel and the regime of Israel and the morality of Israel, but also that there is almost nobody to tell the story for the Israelis. And then I gradually dedicated my career covering the occupation, being quite exclusive, I must say, not with great pride. And throughout those years, my views changed quite dramatically and quite in a radical way.
Yes. Is it difficult for you to go into Gaza at the moment?
In the last 15 years, there's no Israeli, no civilian at least, who was able to go to Gaza. They prevented Israel, prevented all the Israeli journalists from going to Gaza. For me, it is almost a personal tragedy because I'm very attached to Gaza and the big stories are in Gaza.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I can't get there. And if you will ask me, what is the destination in the world that I would love to get more than any other place, I will tell you without any hesitation, Gaza, which is 1 hour drive from my home.
Mhm. Do you feel, maybe I should ask, there's a lot of denialism within the larger Israeli society that these things are
Sure,
happening?
sure,
Yeah,
sure.
and what is
Now
at the
I got
heart? What is at the heart of that?
I think there is no society on earth which lives in such a denial like the Jewish society in Israel. I cannot recall any example in which a whole people is living in ignorance, in denial, not wanting to know, and there is no one who bothers to let the people know because it's convenient for everybody. It's this rare coalition from wall to wall, editors, journalists, governments, army, and readers. They all don't want to know what is happening 1 hour away from our homes on a daily basis. They don't want to know what the friends of our sons and the sons of our friends are doing on a daily basis. Because I claim that would more Israelis know the truth, the political situation would have been different. This is really the iron dome, if you want, of Israeli society, which enable Israel to continue with this brutal reality, with this criminal reality for so many years and feel so good about ourselves. And there is no one who has an interest to put some cracks in this iron dome, and therefore it is so well kept. Any average young Israeli knows much less than you know, Paul, about the West Bank, the occupation, Gaza. It's for most of the Israelis something which is beyond the mountains of darkness and above all beyond their interest. They have no interest, and the media is playing a criminal role by enabling the Israelis to live in this comfort of not knowing.
Yes, I mean, it sounds, I remember asking a similar question to Ilan Pape about the composition of Israeli civil society, and you've also spoken to this too. I'm wondering whether there's any progressive movement. You've talked about whether there even exists an Israeli left. Does that exist in Israeli civil society that's even on the margins, on the fringe, to try, such as yourself, to bring greater awareness to what is happening?
Yeah, we should respect those small but very devoted and very courageous groups, and they are doing a hell of a job, but there are two problems. One, that they are very small in numbers, and secondly, that the Israeli establishment and the Israeli media is doing anything possible to delegitimize them, to not to bring their voice, not to tell their story, not to give them any platform. For many years, for example, we believed that if soldiers who served in the occupied territories will start to speak up when they get older and wiser, this might be a game changer, because it's not some leftists, not some journalists, but soldiers who have been there. And this happened. And we have this adorable NGO called Breaking the Silence.
Yes.
And they brought hundreds of testimonies, hundreds, if not thousands of testimonies of soldiers who just tell what they did. No politics, nothing. This what we were told to do, this what we were doing. And the media and the establishment succeeded to delegitimize all those testimonies as lies, as not valid, or those that you cannot believe to, and they lost any possible effect on Israeli society. And this is true about many other NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
They are alive and kicking, but they are by far too small and by far too delegitimized.
Yes. You've also mentioned, perhaps this ties in with what you just said, that the peace talks over the decades were things that, if I understand you correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Israel was never quite serious about. Um, could you elaborate on that? Am I correct to interpret you as saying something along those lines?
Yes, you are very correct, Paul. I claim that there was never an Israeli prime minister, including Peace Nobel Prize winners, who seriously and sincerely meant to get a just solution. More than this, there was not one single Israeli prime minister who was ready to let the Palestinians self-determination through a viable Palestinian state like any other state in the world.
Yes.
Nobody had it. And most, if not all, of the peace process so protocol, which never aimed to get to peace, for sure not to justice, had only one goal from Israel's point of view, namely to please the Americans and the Europeans, in many ways to cheat them, in order to have more time to establish even deeper the occupation, to build more settlements, and not to be disturbed by the world. And this was working fantastically. I mean, think about it, that ever since the Oslo years in the 90s,
Yes.
which were the big hope for peace, Israel tripled the number of settlers in the West Bank. What does this mean if not a cynical cheating of going to a so-called peace process and continuing to build settlements? I mean, if you have any intention to evacuate those territories, would you build there anything? For sure not. But it was, and I know it only in retrospective, because in those 2 years I was sure we are going for peace. Now, when I look backwards, it's very clear for me that this was another trap and another mean to gain more time.
Yes. I mean, it recalls for me something else you mentioned about this, about the peace talks. Oh, right. So I think you also mentioned that it was also to provide or give the illusion that the occupation is temporary, right? Was that part of why Israel decided to engage in these quote unquote peace talks to do that?
That's a key issue, because as long as the occupation is temporary, it might be recognized as a military occupation. Military occupation, by definition, is temporary and very short range. There were many military occupations in history, but by definition, they should end as soon as possible when the two parties get to any kind of agreement or the world interferes. But military occupation is something which is limited by time. Israel, from the first day of the occupation, claimed that the occupation is temporary. And this was another bluff, because it was never temporary, because Israel never had an intention to put an end to the occupation. But by claiming it is temporary, all the big questions about the regime, about Israel as a democracy, by labeling Israel as an apartheid, were putting aside, because we are dealing with an occupation which, the end is around the corner. And then why to bother in interfering or in labeling Israel as a brutal tyranny, which it is for 5 million people. So, but there must be a stage, and I think after 54 years of so-called temporary occupation, the world has to realize that it was misled, that the occupation is there to stay. Israel never meant to put an end to it, and it cannot be called anymore an occupation or a separate entity than the state of Israel. No, you can't separate it anymore. There is one entity, and under the rule of this entity, there are 6 million Jews and 6 million Palestinians in all kinds of positions. Some of them are citizens of Israel, some of them live in Gaza, some of them are only residents in East Jerusalem, but we live 6 million Jews, 6 million Palestinians between the river and the Mediterranean, and it is by any criteria an apartheid state, because the Jews gain all the rights and most of the Palestinians lack any civil rights, but any civil rights. Maybe the only people in the world that does not have a citizenship of any state. Can you believe it? Millions of people without any citizenship.
Yes, and actually to speak to that, and also the recent article that you just published on Bennett and apartheid. Um, I'm wondering what your view is on the mainstream media, because I remember um, some of them were suggesting, some of the outlets were suggesting that he was ushering in, a new change, that there would be hope for easing the Israeli-Palestinian tensions. Have you seen any sign of that at all?
Look, for me, for a long time, it's very clear that in many ways, the right wingers are better than the leftist Zionists or the Zionist leftists, because at least the right winger are not bluffing. They say, yes, we are racist. Yes, we believe the Jews have rights which the Palestinians will never get. Yes, we believe that the whole land belongs to the Jewish people because of a biblical promise or whatsoever, while the Zionist left is trying to gain from all worlds. Oh, we are liberals, we are against occupation, we are in favor of the two-state solution, we are in favor of rights for everybody. And in practice, they are responsible for more crimes, even than the right wingers, because the settlements project was established by under social democrat governments, one
Yes.
after the other. Now we face a new government, which is a government of hope for some left and central Israelis. But this government had only one purpose, and this was to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mhm.
And it succeeded. For many people, this is enough. Anything which is not Netanyahu is better. I never share this view. Replacing Netanyahu by itself is not a goal for me, because you have to ask yourself, what do you get instead? And we got a prime minister who declares that he will never go for a peace process, who declares that there is no intention to meet Mahmoud Abbas. He will meet the whole Arab world leaders, but not the neighbor who lives under you half an hour from your home, and who declares there will never be a Palestinian state. And this man is being hugged by the West, by Biden, even by Assisi from Egypt. I mean,
Yes.
hatred toward Netanyahu really made people really to lose any kind of logic or any kind of long range thinking. Okay, Netanyahu is gone, and what's now? I mean, Bennett will do something. Why do you hug him?
Yes. Yes. Um, do you feel, I think you've also commented on this, that Israel has reached or is headed towards something of a fascist state? I'm not sure if that's an overstatement or not. Um,
Look, I try not to use big words because many times it becomes a discussion about terminology.
okay. Yes.
Is it as fascist as Nazi Germany? Obviously not.
Yes.
Far from it. Does it have fascist characteristics? Sure, it has fascist characteristics. If soldiers had beaten the day before yesterday a group of 1 dozen, 2 dozens of Jewish leftists who came to a village that Israel cut the water supply in this heat of Israel. And they tried to bring jerry cans with water to this village. And the Israeli army, with officers, not only soldiers, had beaten those demonstrators. I don't even know how to call them, activists, beaten them in a brutal way, but really brutal way. Most of them were old scholars, really, I mean, professors in the universities, really not young people. You should have seen how they've beaten them. One of them was taken to the surgery room.
Mm.
This is not fascism. What is this democracy? Has it any connection to democracy? So those characteristics are long time here. And
Yeah,
these were Jewish demonstrators, not the Palestinians. What we do to the Palestinians is obviously much worse. But even towards Jews who want justice, the regime becomes more and more brutal and more oppressive.
yes. Um, I mean, I feel that also speaks to there's this connection that I think is becoming more apparent through the work of B'Tselem and some of the videos that we've been seeing, especially since May, the May siege, of this connection between Israeli settlers, the military, and the larger state. Um, do you feel that's entrenched within the the how do I say this, sort of the way that the Israeli state operates, or is it accidental?
Nothing is accidental. For many years, I thought it was accidental. But when you look backwards, you see that everything is very systematic. This is not accidental. There is a grand plan, even though maybe it was never phrased and for sure never written, but there is a grand plan to keep the territory under Israeli control, to try as much as you can to get rid of the Palestinian population in those territories, as much as you can to try, at least in certain areas where the weak population is, like the Jordan Valley and southern Hebron, where it's really the edges of the occupied territories, to try at least the ethnic cleansing there. But basically, there is no intention to return those territories, to make them Palestinian. By all means, all parties in Israel are supporting it, except for the Joint List, which is not Jewish or mainly not Jewish. All the other parties are supporting basically continuing the occupation. Those who say so and those who don't say so. They all support it. And the continuous occupation is not just for the joy of oppressing another people. By all means, not. It is a realization that the Jews in Palestine need more land. Is it true or not? This is the idea. We cannot give up any land if, because of security or because other considerations like lack of territory, like lack of resources. And in any case, it is a well organized policy.
Yes, organized policing. Yes. Um, I wanted to, as we sort of wrap up, Gideon, I want to return to your great work, because you've done um, some extraordinary storytelling. You feature the everyday lives of Palestinians in your journalism, in your book, the punishment of Gaza. Um, for you, like, how in your experience, how have you seen the power of storytelling uh, as a vehicle for change that maybe other modes of communication might not be able to do?
Unfortunately, it is with very little influence. I do it because I feel I need to do it on a weekly basis for so many years. I must tell you, most of the stories are repeating themselves because the occupation is repeating itself. Nothing is changing for the good. If it's changing, it's only for the bad, at least in terms of Israeli public opinion. Stories which did some kind of interest, create some kind of interest in Israeli society 30, 40 years ago, interest today, much fewer Israelis. They, as I say, don't want to hear those stories, don't want to read them. And it's very hard to market them. If it's not Haaretz who does it really out of conviction,
Yes.
no other newspaper would have bothered, or no other media would have bothered to bring those stories. When the entire Israeli media is dehumanizing the Palestinians in a shameful way, I try to so-called rehumanize the Palestinians.
Yes.
And when you are hearing that terrorist was executed by the fence, I'm going there and realizing that it was an innocent teenager who was on his way home, or a disabled person in many cases, or handicapped, or even someone who had some intention to do something but didn't deserve to be executed, as they do
Yes.
execute almost every week.
Yes.
So I have the feeling that someone has to tell those stories as they really were, but I don't think it has a lot of effect on Israeli society.
Um, my final question, Gideon, thank you again for your time, is what you feel that the international community should be doing right now. I believe I'm trying to recall who it was, whether it was either your it's either yourself, Elon Pape, or Chomsky. I remember it was one of you three. I can't remember where I read it, but there was a quote about how the change has to come outside of Israel. So this is why I asked the question about what do you believe the the international community can do.
Look, Paul, first of all, one thing must be clear. Israelis will not wake up one shiny morning and say, oh, this occupation is not nice, it's not kind, let's put an end to it. This will never happen. Israel today has no intention to put an end to the occupation. As long as Israelis and Israel do not pay for the occupation, are not punished for the occupation, they have no incentive to put an end to it. They hardly hear about the occupation. It doesn't bother their daily life. Life in Israel is quite good, quite secure. Here and there, from time to time, there are some explosions, but in the last 20 years, it's quite peaceful, quite secure. People are quite brainwashed, so they think that all the violence is force majeure. It's not something that Israel can do anything about it. And in this context, the only hope could be the world outside. And there is a precedent, because I truly believe that without the intervention of the world in South Africa, apartheid would have lasted until this very moment. It was really about a boycott, and the business boycott, and the sport boycott, and the culture boycott, and the feeling mainly of the business community in South Africa, who came to the government and said, we cannot take it anymore. We have to do something. It cannot last because we pay a hell of a price for this regime. This does not happen with Israel. And that's my main disappointment. For many years, I had the hope that things will get to this. In the last years, I must tell you that the hope is much smaller, because let's face it, the world lost interest in the Palestinian question, in the Palestinian destiny. The Palestinians are now in the worst stage ever, totally lonely, totally divided, without leadership, bleeding, weak. The Arab world couldn't care less about them. Even Europe turns its back to them. United States never really supported them. What is left for them? And you see that even in civil societies in Europe and in the States, there is a decrease of interest. I don't say it disappeared. What we see in campuses in Canada and in the United States is very encouraging, but it's again not big enough. And don't forget that throughout the years, there are now new issues which bother most of the world much more. Not to speak about the pandemic, but even without the pandemic, immigration, climate changes, environment, those are issues that the young generation is much more attached to. And the Palestinians seem to be thrown along the road very lonely with less and less interest. And therefore, if I had some hope years ago that the world will say its word, and not say it well, but take some actions, concrete actions, really to punish the occupier. This didn't happen, but still I have hope because many things in history happened in a very unexpected way, including the fall of Soviet Russia, apartheid South Africa, and the Berlin Wall. They
Yes.
all fell because they were immoral. And
Yes.
finally, I believe immoral phenomena must fall. But
Yes.
right now, I can't tell you the scenario, but it is really on the shoulders and the conscience of the international community.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point you raised. I think there is something a little bit strange about young people. They're invested in all these very progressive causes, climate change, anti-racism, gender issues, but the Palestine cause, I feel, has not received the attention from the young generations. I'm seeing a change, I have to say, just being among other activists in the Toronto community, but the bulk of the attention is not there. And so I think we have to keep fighting to get the attention there because
And not to give up, not to give
yes,
up the
yes.
moment.
So thank you so much, Gideon. I'm very grateful and honored to have had this discussion with you, and I'll keep you posted in the next few days as
Great.
to when this is all up. And continue the wonderful work, please. Thank you.
I will, and thank you for this opportunity.
Oh
Thank you
no,
for
thank you. Okay, enjoy the evening.
all the boys.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye.